Today is drafting a useful lighting plot. And this is not a design session. This is not show you how to design a plot or how to do lighting design. There's a lot of other seminars that do that really well. This is really about how to draft a useful light plot, something that people can actually use. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So first question is, what is a lighting plot? Now, all too often, you've sat around at the bar after a show and sort of pulled out the napkin and started sketching out stuff and saying, yeah, I've got this great idea. But how do you take that idea from your head and actually translate that into a useful document that you can just hand the napkin to somebody and say, here, just load this into the theater tomorrow for me? So basically, a light plot is sort of a roadmap that you're going to be using to get that idea out of your head and make it into some document that people can understand and readily grab it and run with it. So it's all about clarity and communicating all of your ideas in a way that people can quickly grasp. So as you sit down and start drafting on this thing, you first have to ask yourself, who is this drawing for? I mean, it's not for you. You've thought about whatever you're doing for weeks. You need to do something that you can actually pass this information on to somebody else. So you really have to think about who is your audience for this. And a lot of times it'll be starting off simple of you're just drawing out an idea, sending it off to a lighting supplier who's going to be bidding it and getting a cost for it. Now, you might also be sending it off to a master electrician who's actually going to figure out all the cable lengths and prep all the gear and needs a little bit more information. Or is this going to be something you're giving to a lighting director who might be touring with a concert or a ballet and taking it on the road? And so you'll have a slightly different need. Or is this something that you're just going to be showing up and giving it to the stagehand and saying, okay, yeah, this is what we're doing today, and let's load in the show. So first time I loaded into Radio City Music Hall, I was a little bit concerned because I had known, Local One, those guys stagehands can be really tough. And so I show up, and first thing I do is I pull out my plot and I drop it down, and all the stagehands gather around and start looking at it and just say, oh, yeah, we got this. Oh, yeah, we know what you're doing here. Oh, boom, boom. And it was great. And the guys were absolutely fantastic because I had done my homework and I had made everything clearly presented. They were able to take it. We were loaded in by lunchtime. And that's the whole thing is if you've done your homework and you've thought about how you're doing it, then people will just take it and run with it. If you end up having to hem and haw and some things aren't clear or you haven't decided certain things, Local One will punish you. So you really have to think about, what is your audience for this, how to make it clear and how to present it. So, and then with that, you have to think about how is it going to be distributed? Used to be, we would print everything out and then FedEx it. But of course, now you can send people a PDF, you can send a CAD file to somebody. There's multiple different ways. You have to think about how it is going to be sent out. You might be sending off a PDF to, say, a community theater, and the largest printer they have is 8.5 by 11. So now they'll take your nice big drawing and shrink it down so that they can print it. Well, now suddenly everything's going to be too small to read. So you have to think how things are going to be distributed and factor that into your design when you literally sit down just to start. And then with that, of course, is it standalone or is it part of a package? Are you going to be also including equipment lists, maybe a light right, a hookup? Can people just take it and load in the show with what you've given them? Or do they actually need a whole bunch of other data with it? So I have to think about how much you need to put on the drawing and how much you can actually send in later. So all those things to think of even before you sit down to actually do any drafting. Now, one of the things I want to bring up, USITT has put out a set of standards of what they call the recommended practice for the theatrical lighting design graphics. You can download it from USITT. There's a bunch of different websites you can find it. In Europe, there's OSAT that has basically the same sort of standards. What it is basically saying, here's a set of symbols that we can all agree on, that when we see this, we're going to consider this a, we'll instantly recognize it as this is a 19-degree LICO, this is whatever. Challenge with that is, of course, it doesn't cover everything. There's always going to be some piece of equipment, some other oddball scenario that isn't called out in their standards. It's just a starting place. So you really have to take it and say, yeah, here's some standards, make it easy, but ultimately every drawing is going to be unique. So let's take a look at a basic lighting plot. Pretty much show up at a theater, hand somebody a lighting plot. It's like, what are the 3 basic things that you really need to make sure is included? Most important, title block. First thing they're gonna look at the drawing and say, it's like, oh, do we even have the right show? Is this the show that's loading into this theater? Oh, and it's the right date. Okay, good. Now that we know that we've got the right drawing we're working on, what are we doing? Oh, so now you've got a symbol key. Your symbol key is we're going to call out all of the symbols that you use in your drawing. So all of your lights, all of your various pieces of equipment, and then also how on your particular drawing, how are you marking out what the color is, what the unit number is, channels and dimmers. Various theaters, you might have your circuit number is your dimmer number. And some places you'll actually have a patch so that you need to, have circuit A1 will go to dimmer 22, which might be channel 15, in which case that's 3 different pieces of data that potentially needs to be thrown on that drawing. So you want to call it in your symbol key, what information are you going to find on this drawing and how is it organized? And the next thing is the scale and orientation. Once we know, okay, we're going to be taking these lights, dropping into the theater, where is it going to fit in this theater? So traditional theater, plaster line and center line is basically your origin. Your plaster line is the upstage edge of your proscenium. A lot of times in the theater, you'll actually still have that marked out. You'll also have the center line. So when we measure everything, we're calling that ground zero. Everything's going to be measured off from that. And then I'll also include a scale and a scale bar in the corner so that when people look at it, we can say, oh yes, this is 1/2 inch scale. Now, I always include a graphical interpretation of that because all too often you send something off, say to Europe, set for a 8.5 by 11, and they print it on an A4 sheet. Suddenly you can't take your scale ruler and measure everything. So useful to have something like that. But the important thing is you've got the 3 critical things: your title block, your symbol key, and then some sort of orientation to figure out where you are in the space. So let's dig a little bit more into each of these things. So title block. Title block is going to, even if you've got multiple pages of drawings for a particular show, your title block is going to have certain critical things that are going to be on all of the pages. And of course, the most important thing is, what's the show? What's the show? Where is it? Who you are, your contact information, which is super critical, and of course the dates. You certainly don't want somebody to start loading in last year's show because they happen to have the same show and the same lighting designer and everything else. And so those things are all super critical to have. Now, depending on the show, you may also include a bunch of other stuff. You might have the producer, the director, the technical director, you've got programmer or a head electrician, maybe even the equipment supplier. Again, you have to decide what are the most important things that you need to have on this drawing. If you happen to skip the producer, technical director, programmer, but your contact is on it, you may get the phone call from your head electrician saying, how do you want whatever on this? And if they had the programmer's name, they would know, oh yes, I know he likes it certain ways. So again, every situation will be different. The most important thing is, your name, your contact information, and the show. So that'll be on every page. That's all based on the project. Now, in each individual sheet, You're also going to have more information. You're going to have the title of that particular sheet, the number of it, the scale on that particular sheet, and then the version number and the publish date are really critical. I'll often highlight them simply because on certainly larger shows, they may get 3 or 4 versions, and you really want to make sure that everyone can instantly know that, yeah, we're dealing with version 17, we've got the right one, we're ready to go. So that one you'll have on each individual sheet, and each sheet may be different. You may call it LP1, you may call it just sheet 1, sheet 2, whatever. But your title block information with your show and name will be consistent throughout. This component stuff will be different on each particular page. Now, those are the critical things. Now, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you could also potentially add depending on your scenario. One of the things I'll always throw in is an index. If you happen to have multiple pages for your drawing, you might have an overhead drawing, a control drawing, a rigging drawing, and that way people can instantly know that, oh yeah, I really need the rigging information. Oh, I should look at page 5. And you might not see, you know, where the motors are and everything on this particular plate, but you know, oh yeah, I know it's going to be someplace else. Index is super useful. When I'm doing something at a convention center, say I've got 50 different small breakout rooms in a convention center, and you know, my electrician will be like, oh, I need to go to a ballroom, you know, F22. Where is that? I'll throw in a little map, just tucked in the corner, a little red dot on where this particular room is, so that as they're looking at stuff, they say, oh yeah, I'm in this room. Where is it? Oh yeah, I know it's right there. Again, you don't need it necessarily in a theater, but a convention center, you might need it. One producer I work with always likes to throw a calendar on it, just so that we know when is it loading in, when is the show, when is it loading out, how much time do we have. And having a calendar there is really nice, so that when you're sitting down and saying, oh yeah, so if we're loading in on the 1st, we know that scenery is going to be 2 days behind us, and then video will come in after that. Oh wait, video is coming in on the Sunday. That means it's going to be a different union. And again, sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't, but it's a useful thing to throw on. Disclaimer, certainly always good to have, you know, especially if you've got something, you know, rigging or something like that, that you don't want to be responsible, call it out. With that, engineering drawings will always get stamped. If you happen to be a member of USA, you'll have a USA stamp. So again, there'll be a place for that on your drawing. And one thing I've started putting onto drawings is a QR code. A few years ago, I noticed that a lot of the stagehands coming in to load in the show would look down at the plot and then whip out their phones, snap a photo of where it is they're going to be working. And that way they would have, you know, a drawing of the plot on their phone. Easy thing to do, put a QR code on. That way they can click download a PDF version of that drawing and actually have it wherever they're working. It's also really good for head scenarios where drawings were faxed and people simply couldn't read, you know, is that a 5 or a 7? By downloading a PDF, they get a nice clean copy that they can read. Now, caveat with that, don't put a QR code on anything that you wouldn't post on Facebook. If you have any proprietary information, if you have client information, maybe it's a new car reveal, maybe it's got the phone number for the executive producer. Don't want that going out on the internet. So be real careful about what you decide you can put on, you know, what sort of drawings you're going to disseminate by putting a QR code on it. And as soon as, for me, as soon as the show gets done, I take it down off a Dropbox, and that QR code doesn't do anything good. But it's still out there. So you have to be careful on, if you put those on. So various things you have to decide, is it appropriate for my particular drawing? Is this something that would be useful? Then you put it on. If not, skip it. Keep it cleaner. So next thing, key to instrumentation. Here is where you're really going to define what the information is that you're including on your drawing and how it's going to be organized. You may have a different key for different types. You may have one for your conventional fixtures that have dimmers and channels. You may have another one for your automated lights that don't have any dimmers. You may have another one for video elements and different things. May have multiple keys, but you need to be able to look at it and instantly know that, oh yes, this is how we reference this stuff. So in my key to instrumentation, I have my key. Here you can see I've got two, one for my conventional fixtures and one for my automated fixtures. And then I list off all of the fixtures that I'm using so that every time, every light that's going to be used on the drawing, I've got that called out and they can instantly recognize that, oh yes, this is a so-and-so, this is a so-and-so. Now, you'll also have a lot of things that you'll need to include. So if you've got templates, if you've got top hats, if you've got that weird flange that you need to attach it to the truss that goes underneath, all that needs to be called out so that when somebody looks at the drawing and says, I don't recognize this, they can instantly go to the key to instrumentation, find it, and figure out where they're going. Some things, you may or may not need to put on the drawing. Follow spots, hazers. If you've got, say, touring dimmer racks, lighting consoles. If you're touring with a console, you may, put it on the plot and let the venue know that, oh yes, we're traveling with a Grand MA, so that we'll be interfacing that. Network nodes. Whatever it is that you need to tell the crew and tell the theater about, good place to put it. That way they'll know, oh, it's on the drawing. I know we're going to have a couple hazers here. Things I'll include are counts on everything so that we'll know that, oh yeah, on this particular show, we've got 38 Sharpie washes. On this particular one, I've got 8 Source 4 zooms. If you've got 3,000 lights, it's really tough to just find those 8. So by calling it out and knowing that, oh yes, we've got 8 of those, then, it's easier to work around the plot. Depending on the scenario, you might throw in color frame counts, gobos and examples of gobos. I was touring with a ballet company one time, and we would have a gobo wash, just standard foliage gobo wash over the entire space. Now, they would always load in the night before, so I was dependent on the local venue to pick a gobo and say, oh yeah, put it in those 30 lights for, a tree wash. By putting a couple examples of, this works, this is good, we like this, then the venue can say, oh yeah, we have 30 of those, we're covered. So again, it worked for that particular scenario, not something you necessarily need for all of them. And I always put on my, in my key, modes. If I have my BMFL blades, they're in mode 1. That way, when they're prepping it, they know that, oh yes, these are in these modes, these are in those modes. Again, more information, include it if it's necessary. That way you don't have to have somebody calling you up and saying, it's like, oh yeah, what's the mode for this? And of course, with moving lights, you need to say which way is front. What is the front for this? Which way are the tails going? Frequently, we'll just say all the tails go stage right. And that way, it's the crew, everyone's hanging it. We know exactly which way things are going. And you don't turn on the rig and find out that half your lights are pointing in different directions. So that's all the stuff that you can throw into your key to instrumentation. So those things you'll have long before we actually start putting any lights on your drawing. So let's look at a typical light plot for a theater. So here I have an overview of the entire space. Gives me a good idea with a little cursor. I can see here I've got follow spots over in this area. I've got my stage space. If I happen to have cameras, something else in the audience that I need to call out, this gives me a good overview of how everything fits in the space. Up in the top right, I'll have the line set schedule, and this will be called out with all the different pipes. It'll call out what the trims are for them, which ones are being used for electrics. So this gives me a good overall space of how everything fits. Might include scenery and stuff like that, just so that we know this is our space. Then we go into the detail. So now we have a drawing where we can actually see what the numbers are and stuff, what the colors are, how everything fits together. We've got the bigger picture. Now we zoom into the smaller picture in the more detail. So we've got, as you're laying stuff out, if you need to move things, here I've got a front of house truss. If I needed to make this a slightly smaller drawing, I could move that front of house truss over. As long as you call it out and say, hey, this goes someplace else, but it gives you an idea of how it fits. Numbering typically starts with going at the proscenium and going back. So pipe 1 is just upstage of your proscenium, going up to whatever your pipe is. Your electrics start, electric 1 is generally right behind the proscenium, and then going back, however many you have. Same thing gets reversed when you're out in the audience. So catwalk 1 will always be closest to the proscenium. Catwalk 2 goes further out. Same thing, your box booms going further out. And then the numbering, instrument numbers themselves, typically starts stage left to stage right. Or if you've got booms or anything stacked, you go top to bottom. The way that was started was back in the day when the guys actually running the lights were all backstage. So for them, it was an easy thing to look up and say, oh yeah, there's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, of course, we're running from generally out front of house, which makes things opposite. Can you change it? Of course. One of the things you should think about is, how are you numbering things? A lot of times where I'll be designing it, but then passing it off to a programmer who will work with it, I'll let him decide, oh yeah, you know, I'm going to channel in this particular way. I'm going to call my whatever moving lights start with 301 to 350. Be flexible. Talk to your head electrician. Talk to your programmer. Talk to, if you're sending it out on tour and there might be a lighting director going out with it. Talk to them. What makes them feel comfortable on some system that makes sense? Because ultimately, it's all about passing on the information to somebody else. And if you can make it easy for somebody else to understand it, then you're ahead of the game. Here's a little zoom in on just a corner of the plot. And here you can see I've got some booms that in a top view, you can't see how they all lay out. So what I've done is I've done an elevation. I just put it off on the side. And I've measured off how all the lights stack up. And then there's an arrow showing, oh yeah, it's actually going to sit over here. And then I've got the electrics called off. So you can see electric 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, everything clear so that when they're talking about, oh yes, electric 4, number 38, you can instantly spot it, know what we're dealing with. So your plan view gives you all of the top view. Then you'll also have a section. Not essential, but a lot of times you really want to have it. So your section is basically showing your heights. Now, typically you would do a section through the center line. It could be facing either stage left or stage right, but this gives you an idea of the space and how things are in terms of heights. For theater, It's generally a given where your stage is, where your audience is, and how you could do a section through a center line. If you happen to be in a black box, then it's not clearly defined. Or if you're working in, say, a tent or something unusual, you might need to do multiple sections. One going down through the center line that you've defined, one going across a certain area. They're all just tools to show how the heights fit, how the scenery fits, how everything fits in here. So again, you have to make a judgment call on how many you need and how you're going to do them. But this gives you, again, additional information that you don't get with just the plan view. Zooming in detail on this, what I'll do is I'll call out the distance to all of my different positions and the angles. So here I know that from a person standing center stage, a light that's on the balcony rail is about a 17-degree angle. My follow spots are going to be 30 degrees. So I can know, okay, is this going to work for what I need? Is this going to be too steep, too shallow? Oh, and because it's such a long throw, do I need to use a 5-degree versus a 10-degree? Useful information to have. Also on this, I'll have the trims of various pipes, my trusses and stuff like that. Good way to know, oh, is somebody in the balcony going to be able to see around the line array to see what's happening upstage? Or is there going to be a portal, and is it going to block certain lights that I need to have shooting out into the audience? Again, section just shows another set of geometry of how you can make things work. Always good to have just to clarify certain things so that if anyone has a question of, oh, does this work here? You've got a drawing, you've got it explained for them. So that's theater. Let's now move to another scenario of a concert touring plot. When you're going to be doing a concert tour, you're not going to have the given things of electric pipes and a catwalk and all of the fixed things that you typically have in a theater. Here you're coming in with your own scenario, your own trusses and all the other stuff, and you're basically defining your space potentially uniquely every time you do it. So with this, you really need to describe what is your space. Typically, what we'll do is we'll decide that the front lip of the stage at center is going to be our origin, and so that everything we measure off from that point. Because we don't have electrics 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we've got a bunch of different trusses. And it's up to me to decide, okay, I'm going to call it truss 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, truss offstage right, truss onstage right, truss front of house. Whatever you decide to call it, you just need to make it really clear so that people can look at it and say, oh yes, I'm dealing with this truss. And with this, there are certain things on this particular drawing, you can't convey all of the information we need. So we've got some positions that are mounted vertically. Not going to be able to understand it on this drawing. We're going to need extra drawings. Couple other things I'll throw on this is, where are my dimmers? It's good to know that, oh yes, I've got a power drop here, so the electrician can know that, oh yes, this is what I'm expecting for power and where it's going to fit. And then of course your whole crew can know that, oh yes, where are all the cables running? So useful things to have on this. And then of course I'll throw in the band layout so that people know where things play in terms of the space. So with that, I'll go ahead and break it out and say, okay, this is a overhead view. These are just the overhead trusses. We don't care about the band gear or any of the other stuff. Makes it cleaner, simpler to work with. Now on each of these, I've called out what my truss names are. No, it's a little hard to see. But then I also have called out what the trims are. And I'll have notes of, this is a sloping truss, so it actually drops down to a certain trim further down. Again, this by doing a second drawing, you can make it clearer so that people aren't looking at something and saying, it's like, oh, you've got a light floating in space because it's a floor light. Here you can just clarify and say, yeah, this is what you're working on. Clean, simple, easy. But of course, there's more information that we need for this show. So we'll do another drawing that has, these are the floor package, all of the lights that are going to be just on the floor. We'll have this and information of, you know, how I measure things off from the center line, where things are from, say, the lip of the stage. Detail of just the stuff that's not flown, how it's going to fit in the space. And then I'll do an elevation so that we know, oh, those two towers, where do the lights fit onto it? The circle truss, how do the lights fit onto that? More information that you wouldn't get from just an overhead view needs to be broken out. And of course, for this show, it was critical to have a section so that I know that, oh yes, everything's sloping. How do these things fit? Where do things go into this space? And then I've called out, you know, the trim heights. So you have to decide how many drawings that do you need to actually give the information from, you know, from your head to say, okay, this is what we need to do, and the level of detail you need on each one. So ultimately, it's a judgment call on how much information you need to supply and how much you can assume is going to be obvious. But caveat being, you make assumptions and your crew may decide something else. So always good to have as much information as possible. One of the things we'll also have for concert touring is we'll have a rigging plot. And here, riggers don't really care about where the lights are or anything. They just need to know, how are the trusses, where are the motors? And here I've called off on the side what the motors are, defined my symbols. And then on each of the motors, I not only have the distance measured off of our origin, which is the front center stage, the lip of the stage, but I also have the weights. Now with that, this is what Vectorworks and Braceworks will calculate as the weights. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a rigger. By putting this information on there, I make sure that I've got a disclaimer and I'm saying, I'm not a rigger, I can't decide whether or not it's safe to attach this load to your building. Ultimately, an engineer or a rigger needs to be able to look at it and say, yes, this is safe. So again, another drawing I can just hand to the riggers and say, here's the information you need, and they can take it and run with it. Again, don't have to sit and explain a whole bunch of things because all the information is given and it's done clearly. Now, what happens when you get into some other weird spaces? Broadcast studios are always nice because there's not a defined space of an audience here, or you know, what is a backstage, or it's all based on where the camera is. So ultimately, you've got a completely open space where you can define the space as you want. So with that, a lot of times you'll have a pipe grid, frequently relatively low, you know, much lower than we typically would have in an arena or something like that. So because the angles are so critical when it comes to television work, you know, the guys are very particular that I need this light moved, 3 inches over. So you'll have a pipe grid. Pipe grids typically will be numbered from starting at 1.1 to whatever numbers. Pipes going the opposite direction will be letters. So we can say, okay, hang that 2K light at the intersection of pipe 1 and pipe F. And that way the guys go up there and have a good idea of where they're going to be going. Now, again, you've got so many potential things in a television studio. You could be hanging things off of, you know, hangers, pantographs, C-stands. You could be putting in scissor lifts, you know, all sorts of different places to put lights. You could be hanging lights off of scenery. All of that needs to be called out. so that when somebody's looking at it and they see a light that looks like it's sort of floating in space, you know, you'll have a note on it saying, oh, this is going to be hanging off of a C-stand that we're going to add when we shoot scene 22. Again, you've got lots of potentials for putting lights in all sorts of different ways. It's really, how do you clarify that? How do you make that work so that you don't have people standing around thinking about what was he thinking when he put this light here? You know, make everything clear so that they can all go in and do their work. And with that, looking at television stuff, some of the rigs that you'll put in, you might be putting it up for a season. It might be something that actually stays for several seasons. And when you strike everything at the end of shooting, you might have little Post-its put back in the grid so that, you know, oh yeah, this is where we put, you know, a Brute for last season. Again, lots of good documentation so that you know that, okay, we're putting this together. How did we do this? How did we make it all work? But again, you might also be just doing a music video, in which case you bring everything in, you've got a grip truck full of all sorts of stuff, and you sort of make it up as you go along. But again, if you need to document it so that you can say, oh yeah, we're going to shoot that video again, you've got everything written down. So again, put as much information as possible, but make it clear and concise. So as we get into even larger spaces, we start needing to sort of rethink how we're working on some of this stuff. Working on a trade show, going into a convention center. This particular rig, it was 725 feet wide, 725 by 350 feet. Big space. If we were printing this out on, you know, a normal scale document, this would be a 15-foot wide plot, which is a little tough to carry around in your back pocket. So ultimately what we did was we did everything electronically. So all of my electricians, all of my crew, everyone's got an iPad, and they're all looking at PDF versions. So they can zoom into whatever they need, find the information, and not have to worry about, you know, carrying around this giant sheet of paper. So with this, we ended up having to divide up the space and making it some way that we could figure out how it all fits. First thing we did is clarified, you know, this is Hall D, Hall E, so we can orient ourselves. We know how things fit. Then we chopped up the spaces into different colored zones, and everything from the road boxes to the truss to our schedules were all color coded so that we knew that, okay, I'm going to take a group of 10 people and all the blue boxes and blue truss and load in the blue section. All of your PDFs would be labeled, you know, blue segment, blue control area, blue. Ultimately, all of our trusses, we just arbitrarily said, okay, let's start counting here. So we'll start truss 1, 2, 3, 4 going around. We had a system and we would know that, oh yes, truss 15 blue is going to be in the blue segment, and we can figure out where it is. Again, it's defining your space and clarifying how you're going to organize things. And if you can make your organization something that really simple that people can really pick up on, then nobody has to sort of stand around and say, I don't understand. So we'll still print out large overview plots, but you know, by having stuff organized and thought out, the crew can grab it and just run with it, and nobody's standing around waiting for information. Here's a zoom in on just a little bit, and it shows you we've actually got some large spaces, not a huge amount of lights, but we do have a lot of other information. We've got some scenery called out. We've got floor data control things laid out. Lots of information. The head electrician has laid out where my breakouts are, how my circuits are going, how the control system's going, all of this information. Very useful for him and for the crew, but makes a little crowded for when you're just trying to find, oh, channel 304. So I'll also have a focus plot. So here, again, because it's electronic, you'll just turn off the unnecessary information for this drawing. I don't care about circuits. I don't care about the control stuff. I just need to know what my channel is. And then, of course, I'll have arrows saying this is where things are going. Because it's electronic, you can print off multiple different copies. You can have multiple variations. So it's really each one decide what are the important things you need to have on this drawing. And don't be afraid to have numerous drawings. Because a lot of times having a cleaner drawing with less information when you need it is better than having a drawing that has every arrow, every piece of information on it. So again, knowing what your audience is, adjust your drawing to make it fit for the scenario. Now, for big situations like this, what we'll often do is make what's called schematic views. Now, back in the day, we used to print out the drawing at a usable scale, all 15 feet of it, and then take a pair of scissors and chop up all of the trusses and mount each one onto a board so that we could say, okay, here is my T1E truss. Again, because this is done in CAD, you can go ahead, chop it up, move things around so that one particular plate has all of your stuff on it. It doesn't show any context. It doesn't show you how truss T1E relates to truss 68C. But if I need to know that, oh yes, I've got a LECO at 22 feet from the origin, that's important there. So you have to define how is this going to be oriented in real life. But just for that little piece of information, you can say, okay, yeah, here's a great way of condensing everything down onto one page. You have all the information, but you're skipping all the extraneous stuff of the scenery and all the others. So don't be afraid, chop it up, make it something useful. But again, make it so that people can instantly know, oh yeah, I know this is the north end, this is whatever of how this fits. With computers and with Vectorworks, I think you can also do this with AutoCAD and some others. You have the option of data visualization, which is basically doing a temporary color overlay to clarify things on your drawing. We used to go and change all of our symbols for vipers to bright blue. And all of our auras, we would change the symbol itself to something yellow. That's really nice, but you end up with, a very colorful plot. Potentially you don't want that. The nice thing with data visualization is you can do it as a temporary thing. So what I'll do is I'll do a temporary color overlay where I've colored all of my lights based on the fixture type. So with this, it's a really great way to say, oh yeah, so where are my vipers going? Oh, they're laid out here. Oh, where are my LECOs going? You'll know exactly how they are. Don't be afraid of color. It's a very useful way to quickly send information out there. People can look at this drawing and get an idea of, oh yeah, those two lights over there, third from the end. Okay, yeah. Then they'll go back to the larger drawing and say, okay, yeah, I need that fixture. Great thing with data visualization, you can do all sorts of stuff. I'll do something as fixture types. I'll also do one for universes. It's a great way when you're talking to your electrician and say, oh yeah, can you just run data for all of these? They can instantly see that, oh yeah, I'm starting my data here, I'm gonna be running to here, and then, oh yeah, that's gonna be a different universe. Again, using color to make things understandable so that they can quickly grasp the concept and then they're not standing around waiting to figure things out. DMX universes, I'll often do vendors so that You know, if I'm working on something like this, I'll know that, oh yeah, I've got a couple of fixtures that are coming from Four-Wall, New York. So when the crew is working over on that section, don't look for the Four-Wall Las Vegas boxes. It's going to be maybe a different color, something else. Again, giving them information so they can quickly say, oh yeah, here are some things to be aware of. It's a temporary thing. Super useful to have. And on larger shows, I make a field on my moving lights of a date modified. And I'll just have a field where I just call out when I went and actually touched things. Traditionally, we would go and have a red marker circled around the light. The challenge with that is once you've started making 10 or 15 changes, it gets a really cluttered drawing. And if you are working in a room that's 750 feet wide, finding those two lights that you changed, it's not going to be obvious. So by using data visualization and some color on the dates, I can instantly see that, oh yeah, those red ones, yeah, pay attention to those, make sure my schedule fits, everything else works. Again, quick way to identify things, using color just to, again, give information quickly and easily. What do you do with it? I'll just do a page. I'll have one page, just a couple different variations of color. They don't need to necessarily zoom in and see, you know, what the instrument number is, but they can see, oh yeah, those couple over there, those are all going to be subrented. Oh, that's going to be a different universe. Again, a bunch of different ways of doing stuff. The whole thing is how to give that information as quickly as possible. So to recap, make it clear, make it easy, make it so that when your crew is coming up and they're going to start loading in, they can look at your drawing and say, oh yes, I can instantly recognize certain symbols you've got. I recognize how things are fitting into the space. The last thing you want is a bunch of stagehands standing around saying, okay, so what do we have where? How does this fit? You know, ultimately, you've only got a finite amount of time and the show will happen. So the more that you can do at the start by doing your homework, making things clear and concise, if you can load everything in 3 hours, then you've got the whole rest of the day to sit and program, tweak things, make things work. So really do your homework beforehand and make it all as clear and concise as possible. Make it legible and don't write a novel. I have seen some drawings where people have written, this is a gobo wash for Act 3 that needs to be something really pretty that fits underneath it, but don't need to know that. Just put the important information, make it legible, make it clear so that everyone can see it and say, oh yeah, I've got this, I know what's happening, and they can run with it. Keep it simple. Quick little checklist, make sure before you send out any drawing, do you have your title block? Do you have your current title block with the current name, your contact information, all of that stuff? Is your key, does it actually include all of the lights, including those couple extras that you forgot and just added at the last minute? Make sure it's on the key. And then scale, print size, make sure that people know when they get the drawing, they can look at it and say, this is how it all fits together. I can orient myself and they can just take it and run with it. Because it's all about wanting to get your crew all going in the same direction as quickly as possible. A couple of resources. For a great resource of looking at past plots is the Lighting Archive. New York Foundation for the Arts has an online archive of some Broadway plots, things going back to Theron Musser. It's a great way to look at how did they design in the 70s and 80s. And great resource as a historical thing. It's really fantastic to look at. More contemporary, Live Design, PLSI, Lang Sound, PLSN, bunch of magazines. They will do in-depth discussions with the designers on how do you light the Super Bowl. and you'll see a plot, and they'll see potentially numerous plots. Take a look at what they've done and how it all fits together, and how do they transfer the knowledge that they've got in their heads and put it in a way that everyone else can understand it. A couple of the resources, Light Plot Deconstructed, great book. USITT and OSAT are the ones that have put together the standards for line weights and some common symbols. And you can, cadfortheater.org has the OSAT. The USITT ones you can download from a whole bunch of different places. And you can get symbols. Most manufacturers will actually have symbols for all of their lights, generally done in AutoCAD, but some of them also have it in Vectorworks. Caveat with that, all too often you get a manufacturer will have a beautiful symbol that has all of the details of their light. It'll show you where the screws are, where the fans are, you know, every flange, every bolt, every piece of text. If you happen to be building a custom road box and you need to know exactly how big that, you know, bolt is on the side, then you need that. You don't need it on a light plot. You could just as easily have a circle and say, you know, this is a Mac Viper. So if you do have symbols that you pulled in from manufacturer's website, clean them up, keep it simple, and keep a library. You know, it's always really useful to, you know, be working on something and say, oh yeah, I've got a symbol for that KinoFlow someplace. Let me pull that in. So, so there's tons of resources out there. It's really, now's the time to play with it and, you know, look at what some other people have done, look at other people's plots, and figure out how did they transfer their knowledge to their crew in a quick and effective way. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach cad@lighttouchdesigns.com. And then I just want to do a plug for our industry and where we are right now. I hope everyone is aware of We Make Events. I think that one may be primarily US, but it's really an organization for trying to get some legislation done for helping and maintaining our industry. I know we're all going through a lot right now, and there's, you know, very few theaters open, and we could all use more work. So We Make Events is a great organization, and Behind the Scenes Charity is a fantastic organization that you know, is providing financial assistance, mental health, physical health. You know, it's a great industry-specific charity for helping our stagehands. So both of them should be supported. So, and that's it. Let's open it up to questions.
Okay, Michael, thank you so much. We do have some questions that came in. The first one is, when you're using DataViz to show timing, are you entering the timing information during work calls into your drawing?
Yes. Again, it depends on how you're going to be doing it, but yeah, I'll just do either timestamps or just, you know, literally grab the field and say, okay, yeah, changing these. You know, again, you have to decide, is it worth notating on that, you know, for your specific scenario? It's a judgment call.
Okay, next question. You mentioned a disclaimer on the title block. Where do you get this text, and what do you need to state? And does a lawyer need to approve the text?
Lawyer doesn't need to approve it. Certainly, if you happen to have connections with a lawyer, it's a useful thing to have. Basically, I got it from another lighting designer. The main thing I was saying was that this information is proprietary. It is, you know, created by me, and no, you can't steal it. And in terms of rigging, everything needs, you know, the lights that you hang need to be UL approved, or whatever your UL organization is in whatever country you're in. Basically just some common sense things of a little bit cover your ass. You know, you're putting something out there and saying, okay, the people that actually hang the lights need to make a judgment call that, yes, this light is actually safe, and the trust that it's connected to is actually safe. You can't be responsible for everyone. So putting a disclaimer in there is a little way of saying, it's like, use due diligence when you're actually hanging this plot. So if that helps.
Okay, next question. What is a good resource for finding the architectural drawings and dimensions for venues?
Uh, that really varies. Um, there are a couple websites people have put together where they're doing sharing of some of these. The big caveat with a lot of the drawings is I've had numerous CAD files sent to me that I'll then go to the venue and realize that, oh yes, this was 5 years ago, and since then we've had reconstruction and the entire place, all the rig points have changed, everything has moved. First thing is to reach out to the venue. A lot of times, especially theaters, they will actually have CAD files that they'll send you along with the rep plots and all the other information. If you can't get it from the venue because maybe it's an older hotel or something like that, then you start calling around the shops around and saying, hey, does anyone have for whatever Four Seasons hotel? There isn't a clearinghouse for that information simply because a lot of the information is obsolete. And the last thing you want is to, as we did recently, we loaded in a show and we realized that the drawings that the venue had sent us were the design drawings and not the as-built drawings. And all of our rig points were 15 feet off. So we're about 3 hours into load-in, we realized that nothing is lining up where it should be. And the venue had sent out the wrong drawings. So whenever you get drawings from somebody else, take it with a grain of salt that, you do need to do your own due diligence and check it for accuracy.
Wonderful. We've had a few questions come in asking if there will be a recording available for this session. And I just wanted to reassure you that yes, we do record all of the sessions that we do. And I can, in just a second, I'll pop the link into the chat box so that you have access to that. So the next question, with PDFs, how do you solve for problems related to file size and different viewer software or software versions?
File size, first thing I would say is look at your symbols. If you have a lot of mesh objects or a lot of symbols that have a lot of detail, a PDF is going to basically divide up your things into small lines. So if you've got 50 lines that are drawing a Mac Viper, it's going to take a lot more space in your file than if it was just an outline of it. So if you can simplify all of your symbols, get rid of extraneous, especially mesh objects, clear that down as much as possible. And then I'll often go and actually rasterize the image and convert it to a JPEG, so it's no longer a vector file PDF. You can't zoom in all the way because, of course, it gets pixelated. But for a lot of stuff, you can set it to 200 dpi, and that decreases your file size a whole bunch. In terms of different versions, ultimately, you just sort of need to test it. If you've got stuff embedded in it, if you're trying to do 3D PDFs and stuff like that, then you run the risk of other people's software not being able to read it. So if you keep it as small and as simple as possible with minimum amount of stuff embedded in it, then more likely people will be able to deal with it.
All right, next question. How do you organize all your past plots on your computer, and how often do you refer back to older plots?
I do everything chronologically. So I do have certain segments for concert tours. I'll have one particular band, I'll have all of the drawings dumped into one particular folder and break it all up by venue. um, Depending on, I have certain clients where it's just like, oh yes, we're doing the same show last year. So I'll just go into last year's file, everything done chronologically by project. I'm typically doing maybe 20 shows a year, so I don't have a huge amount. So if I know that I need to do the Sony show from last year, I can just, look at Sony and say, oh yeah, that venue, boom, and pull it up there. And then of course I have a huge database of all the venues that I've been to. And I make it a priority to every venue I go to. I take photos. It's very easy to forget that, oh yeah, there's a huge chandelier here that completely blocks all of your lines. You know, build a build a folder of all the different venues with as much information as you can put onto each venue. And that way, when you come back to it next year, you'll actually have that data. So always useful to have.
All right, next question. Have you looked into MVR? And if so, what are your thoughts about this new concept?
I think it's great. I think we'll see what happens with it. Right now there's a lot of stuff where there's not a lot of back and forth. I think, you can pull stuff into the Grand MA, but you can't, move scenery in Grand MA and then push it back into Vectorworks. We'll see what happens in the future. Same thing, ETC has done some amazing stuff with their augmented reality. Let's see where we go with it. It's still in its infancy right now, but since we all have lots of free time, it's like, let's play with it. Let's, make it work.
All right, we have a few more questions. Presume you are largely using Vectorworks for your drafting. Any other tools you find helpful?
Vectorworks is my go-to, in that I use that constantly. I also use Twinmotion for my visualization. I use that primarily for architectural stuff. And then MA 3D for my visualization for pre-programming. The nice thing is we're now at a point where things are talking to each other. And with MVR, you can draft something once in Vectorworks and it talks to Lightright and it can talk to your Grand MA console, and you can export things to your previs, and then you can save a movie file that you can then email off to a client to show something. So, but yeah, Vectorworks is my my primary go-to in terms of drafting stuff.
All right, this next individual said that he's new to lighting from the world of audio and was asking for suggestions on where to go next as a resource to help decide on where to put the fixtures on the plan.
There's there are tons of college textbooks for how to design a light plot. There's also some really great websites. Can't think of off the top of my head, but if you Google, there's definitely some good webinars on how to lay out lights for whatever your scenario is, be a church or a theater show or a concert. There's tons of stuff out there on the internet, and then look at some of the other Martin webinars. They have a lot more on how to design something. This one is really about how to just get the design onto paper.
All right, next question is asking, what other pieces of software or hardware are part of your design process?
Software in Vectorworks, I use the Space Mouse, which is a 3D, it's a mouse that allows you to work in 3D spaces really easily. That as many monitors as you can fit in your space and afford, because screen real estate is always critical. And I also use a tablet, a Wacom tablet, every so often when I need to be able to just grab things and move it around. ultimately, when I'm on site, I tend to use just an iPad, or I actually show up on site with about 3 different iPads. One as a remote for my console, one as the PDFs of the plots, and one for my paperwork and all the other stuff that I need to deal with. So, but yeah, lots of screens.
Okay, we have a terminology question. What is the difference between pipes and electrics?
Pipes are just a generic term. And so a theater, you might have 15 pipes laid out, but you're only putting lights on 3 of them. So your first pipe might be an electric, your second pipe might hold some scenery, and your third pipe might be some curtains. So basically, a electric is a sort of subset of your pipes.
Okay, we have a final question here. Do you usually add 3D picture with simple beam visualization? Wow, as an addition to plot. I used to do that to show what I want to achieve, but is it a good idea to do so?
Again, it depends on what your audience is. When they're doing a friend of mine who does a lot of cruise ship shows, they will go through and photograph the position of every light in every queue, so that when they're going to recreate it on a different cruise ship or a different season, they have everything completely documented. If you've got a 200 moving light rig and you've got 800 queues, potentially that's a lot of work to create. But again, if you need to document that, it's a great way to be able to do that. And there's some great software out there for actually doing timestamps on your video and as your cues as you go on.
We did have another question come in asking, you called it a space mouse, right?
Yes. It's basically just a small mouse that allows you to move in multiple axes at once. Really useful for moving around in 3D space.
All right, it looks like that was the final question. But if you have additional questions, Michael's contact information is up on the screen right now, and you can always feel free to reach out to me as well, and I can forward your questions on. Thank you so much, Michael. This is a really interesting presentation.
Great.
Appreciate your time.
Hopefully it was useful.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for attending. We know that everyone's busy and we appreciate that you're continuing to support our series. We've now been going strong for 5 months, and I wanted to let you know that we do have the remainder of 2020 scheduled. So we have over 30 sessions coming up this fall and winter, and then we'll be moving into 2021. So we hope you'll stay with us and join us for those upcoming sessions. Thanks again, Michael. Thank you everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Michael. Great presentation.
Bye, Brad.